All right, getting started. I am here. I made it. All's relatively well, we think. Let's see what's there. Some of the stuff moved around. That is very strong. Fix this up real quick. And away we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. Yes, I know. I look a little tired. I drove all night just to get back home, and but I made it. By golly, and by gosh, and so did you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. It's the chat room. Hanging with us. It's a chat room. What's up? Happy Hump Day. Thank you very much. It was fun being off the air a little bit yesterday as the indictments came down, because the response to them and sort of the mechanics of it is something I don't mind doing on the show, and we will definitely have to do parts of it as we get closer to the actual trial dates, and as they, we get stories about how they're handling motions and blah, blah, blah. The first one that's come out is, I think, Mark Meadows trying to move his to federal court because he doesn't want to be on camera. Yeah, just saying. For the record, though, and don't forget, like, subscribe. It's the morning show. Hi, how are you? Yes, we're over 55K. We're moving it. Did legs get broken last night? They absolutely did. It was a good time. I'm not camera ready. Excuse me. I'm okay. Thank you. Let's say, I'm just checking in with you guys. I can't believe they're actually saying I'm not camera ready. That's just rude. Hi, everybody. There we go. RICO, no. That's going to be good. YouTube is an issue. Is YouTube okay? It's always an issue, I guess. Pardon in federal court? No. That was one of the questions, I suppose, is that some of them are going to try to move it to a federal venue. That does not change it. That does not stop it. The aspects of it that make it a state court, state crime thing. It's just that federal employees can sometimes have their state stuff moved to a federal court, but it does not change the material jurisdiction to where they can get pardoned. Doesn't work that way. I'm back. Woohoo! RICO suave. Did I expect the RICO charges? Yes, because that's the only way they were going to get him and his co-conspirators. I'm more surprised that they're not technically using RICO on all of them. Although federal law, it is easier to charge a large organized crime thing in federal court than it is in a state court. RICO is for states, effectively, because that's, if you really think about it, RICO is almost all the FBI does, because it is across, any movement of criminality that goes across state lines has, look at everything the ATF busts, look at everything in regards to, fighting cartels and all that kind of stuff. It is effectively all the time a RICO thing. The issue is that they have to coordinate with the locals, and their coordination in terms of state police, state prosecutors, and AGs and all that shit, that coordination is up to them. Well, if they don't have a case internally, or they're pursuing a case singularly against individuals, they may not have the ability to link it together. And then you'll see that there's been kind of an overlap in the last few decades as they've sort of tried to figure out where the line is. And that's where you'll see in cop dramas all the time, where they stumble across the feds are running a program inside there without telling the locals, because a lot of times when you're talking about a giant organized crime thing, if the feds are onto it, it's because the locals are involved, right? You don't know which cops are in on it, or if the AG, any of that shit, right? Now, if somebody, Andrea's saying beautiful, it'll be televised. Yes, uh, unless they're successful in moving it to federal court. I don't think they will, because the argument has to be that they were working in their capacity as a officer of the federal government. The issue that Mark Meadows has is that he was engaged in criminal behavior on behalf of the campaign to keep the president in office, even though he had lost. That's that is the exact opposite of his federal duties. That is a violation of his oath. So I don't see him being successful. But they are all going to um they're all going to try and get it. You see the Jeff Goldblum extended figures. Oh, not yet. I did they come? Oh, that's amazing. Charles won't matter because they'll get Trump splaned on Monday. Oh, well, apparently there's a big move to get him to not do his Monday Mike Pillow Fest. In and amongst the you know, all the other bullshit, and the fact that Mike Pillow has himself got a it got the on this, is it today, and it's yeah, it's yesterday and today, right? Parts of it are on today. We'll look at some of it, I have no doubt. Maybe we'll take it live later on. But for the it won't have any impact on any fucking thing. And it's going to be the same shit we've heard before. And it's going to be embarrassing and stupid, easily fact checked. And if anything, if he attacks Ruby Freeman and the other like poll workers in the video and all that kind of stuff, that's a furtherance of the charges against him. He doubles down on it. And again, it's a lot closer to, if I do say so my damn self, it is a lot closer to the E. Jean Carroll situation he found himself in. Only he's not waiting until after he's convicted, I suppose. But there's no fucking difference. He same problem, same issue. Now I have an issue with one of my thank you. Let's go to settings, and video. Yeah, you good? Hold on one second. I have an issue with, I don't know quite why, but my my lovely little output camera that I use for sending it to Phil when he comes on is stuck in vertical mode, which is very strange. There's no real reason for it. It's very peculiar. But I'll work it out. I don't know why that happened. I had to restart my setup when I was already ready to go. I'd even left it to it was working on all cylinders, and then so it won't kill anything. We'll be able to operate with it, but it's a very strange little difference. It's quite curious. Yes, love to Buddha and the Eagle and everybody in Hawaii. Horrible situation there. Again, it's hard to get to the bottom of why it was so hard for them to coordinate and the like. That's going to be a conversation in Hawaii for a very long time. Pilla guy already owes the guy who approved his 5 million. Let him share that garbage. Oh, agreed, and it's all the same shit, by the way. There and I hope, please, if the internet silliness gods can give me a single gift on Monday when he does this ridiculousness, which we will of course do live. Doesn't matter when the fucking thing is on. It'll be a special report. Please, internet gods, please let him use clips from 2000 Mules and let it be the footage of the actor playing the guy sneaking around from 3 different angles that he actually thinks is real footage. Please. So yeah. What has colonialism roots? The existence of Hawaii. Rico Suave. Yeah, the 2,000 Mules thing will just be, oh, it's gonna be so good. It's just so good. It's just so good. It's so I know, and I thought I had it somewhere. Where is it? Oh, it's on this one, I think. Yeah.
2,000 meals coming soon.
Um. There we go. He's going to try and push stuff around and then try to get in office and pardon himself. The issue is that he's electorally he's bleeding voters, and he's creating this giant embarrassment wedge, and there's a bunch of people who will, vote for Trump no matter what, blah blah blah, and you'll hear a lot about them, but as a percentage of the populace, they are increasingly small. They're decreasing in size and or volume, I would say. Most of them are the same size. They're decreasing in volume precipitously. Yeah, 2,000 mules pooping soon. That's what's going to happen. I'm just saying. Um, God will implode the space-time continuum. You won't even know it, and you'll live your life all over again. What are we? Are we doing 12:01 p.m.? Is God in charge of 12:01 p.m.? By the way, if you haven't seen the short film 12:01 p.m., I recommend looking it up on YouTube and watching it. It's the movie that Groundhog Day was sort of based on loosely, and it's fantastic. Yeah, well, they'll always try to shit stir. That should be no surprise to anyone. That said, let me see if I can do this as a jump into. Does that work? Yeah, it works. Good. Okay. I'm just making sure my windows are working for when Phil's on later. And there's a lot to cover, obviously. I've read through a good portion of the indictment. Interestingly enough, if you're one of our regulars and you've seen all of his rallies and his blather, and we did the Jan 6 committee stuff, we went through all the Mike Pillow stuff, it's not going to be new to you. As a matter of fact, everything's going to be like, oh yeah, I remember him. Oh, good. Okay, all that shit you were like, why doesn't somebody arrest this motherfucker for doing this? They took their sweet time. They let the embarrassment drag on, which is how you get rid of the vast majority of his supporters, and you keep stacking. So let's see. So, but I honestly don't see his, um, I don't see a way out of like unless he cops a deal. If he's convicted, if he goes to court and doesn't cop a plea or something for some lesser charge, there's those RICO charges have mandatory minimums in state prison. That's fucking that. And of the group, and let's see if I can get a picture up of the Trump co-defendants. Of the there we go. Oh, it's a big crowd of stupids. I mean, there's a bunch of folks in there. Let's try to do this. Yeah, that'll work, I think. Let's see, go. Yeah. So yeah, shit, I can't even fit all of them in there. That's adorable. Stretch this down, shrink this down like that. That some of these folks, they're like, who the fuck is that? Those are the people who were acting as his fake electors. The lady in the fur coat, I think, is one of them. A couple of these folks down here, her. These are the people who, and when you see the forgery stuff, that's their charge. But because it's a RICO case, it's a scheme to defraud. So you're as guilty for ordering the forgery or allowing it or accepting it as part of the scheme. Because at some point you could, technically speaking, there could be a recording of somebody. This is the exculpatory part. There could be a recording of somebody going, I don't think we should do the elector thing. And because that's forgery. You're lying. You're going to get us trouble, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. The point is, just in doing that, I'm of the mind that that might be where the Mark Meadows or maybe Jenna Ellis or something, or people who jumped ship at one point in so far as their involvement, because Jenna Ellis was, like, I would say, part of the trying to defraud the electorate, trying to defraud the the whatever the Pennsylvania Senate and the Arizona Senate and specifically the Georgia Senate, that she was there with Rudy working on this shit, built like stacking lies. She was aware that what she was saying was bullshit. She was contributing to him lying under oath about what they presumed to know, said they knew, evidence they alleged to have, which is a big fucking part of this. I mean, the oddly enough, the considering Trump's thing on Monday that he thinks is going to happen, one of the things that I think that gets them in the most trouble is that they told the Georgia legislature and others that not only did they have a bunch of affidavits that they that didn't amount to a hill of beans, were a bunch of bullshit. Not only did they say that, but they also said they had evidence of stuff that they were like, "We'll get it to you," with the idea that they were trying to manipulate the whatever the state legislature to offer up some sort of forceful bill that could override a governor's veto. And I don't know that they have the votes in any state to do that, but that was the attempt. And that it was one of those delay it, delay it, delay it, and then people will just move on. This was like a ginormous version of Bush v. Gore. It was the idea that Gore ultimately did win Florida by 500 votes, so he technically won the election, but it had already moved on. That was the impetus for a lot of this foot dragging. He's already in office. He's already there. And if we just drag this out and we get to if we can stop it and confuse everything or freeze it in place, people will get around to the 21st and they'll go, "Oh my God, America can't be without a president. Fuck it. He's president. Fine. We'll work it out later." The problem is Florida was within the margin of 500 votes. The Hawaii thing with the double electors was within 147 votes and ultimately went Kennedy's way. So these were very narrow, very normal moments in electoral history that that people could manipulate because it's so damn thin. This wasn't at all. There was lots and lots and lots of votes. Trump, there was no way he was going to print enough people in any of these states to overcome the votes, period. Especially in Republican-led states where the Republican president is trying to tell the Republican state heads that they were part of a scheme by hook or by crook to keep him out of office, and that was going to be he was going to use that kind of mafia language by fellas, I just need 11,780. Come on, fellas, that shit. It's or the one line that came up in that they used it from the January 6th thing that I think very much stood out was this just tell them the election was fraudulent and let me and the Republican congressman take care of it. We'll handle it. Which is the idea of just abdicate your duties on behalf of your state, and these rando fucks from Texas and South Carolina will manipulate the electorate and the system so that your votes, even though your state didn't go the way we wanted it to, and you got reelected, by the way. That's the other part. In so many of these situations, he lost straight up, but the people that he, the rhinos that he's bitching about, and by the way, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of, which are, deeply embedded in his side, all of them either got elected or maintained their election, or maintained their seat. So the idea that, that this was all fraudulent, they were just throwing ballots in. Why the fuck? I mean, the idea is that they masterfully kept Republicans in. So the amount of faking of ballots across a cascade of offices because again, every officer of the government in Georgia would have been fraudulently elected. The governor, the lieutenant governor, every judge that got elected, their senators, their state senators, everybody. And the cascading effect of, like, if you go to jail for voting illegally, I'm sure, especially if it's coordinated, the RICO laws in just imagine the Fulton County RICO statute being used against people who were coordinating the dumping of 8 to 10,000 votes, because mail fraud and the fake ballots themselves, that's like 5 years apiece. So they're talking about 1,000-year sentences for some of these people. That it's just absurd. So the idea that you would even face that, if you're like, all right, is it important enough to me to coordinate a 10,000 vote margin, and anybody who would play along with that, a lower level worker this is why this conspiracy, by the way, involves technically it seems like a lot of people, but it ain't. Think about the mafia or a cartel. Think about the volume of people involved. It's huge, and there are elements of it that are like a lizard's tail, breakable parts, where you're like, any big conspiracy like this, where it's the mafia or cartels or some sort of giant criminal enterprise, they have parts of it they can jettison and lose. Like new people, low level people, that if they get picked up by the cops, they end up dead a couple days later. That kind of shit. And then they have the capos, the mid-level people, and then they've got the bosses. And there's a couple of issues that Trump has. One is everybody thinks they're a fucking boss for the boss, which is very capo, but it's also like they all think they've got a shot at it once he goes, because they're all staring at the king going, he's spun. So all these folks are, have a much higher view of their position than they actually have, which is a problem when you're running a criminal enterprise, because they all think they're, way more important than they are. The other issue is that it's too small an organization for a giant, fraudulent vote scheme, because there's just not enough working parts. You don't have anybody you can kick. You don't have anybody, again, it's the concept of the volume of fake votes and all the stuff that they're alleging is so enormous that the people involved, there would be so many of them, it'd be nearly impossible not to find one who's willing to get paid a shit ton of money to flip on and write a book or an article for the New York Post or some shit like that. If his idea about what democratic fraud looks like. The issue that they have is that this is just a little clique of fucking idiots. And they thought they could bully everyone, because that's exactly the strategy that they seem to have was, hey guys, I'm on your side, you're on my side. Let's just get this done. This kind of shit happens all the time. And it absolutely does not. This is what happens when you smoke your own stash, when you believe your own press, or you get all of your conspiratorial nonsense from Joe Rogan's podcast, and listening to him has convinced you that the Illuminati does it. Why can't I? Thanks, Gino. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give a thumbs up, support the show in any way that you can. If you can't, that's okay. But there's a Venmo over there if you want to help out. We're trying to get a new computer. And also, just a thumbs up. Just give a thumbs up, or subscribe if you're new here. We just cleared the 55,000K mark, and I'm very excited about that. We have crested past a couple of our immediate competitors. I keep tabs. I know what's going on. Some of them aren't directly competitors because they're not in our political wheelhouse. But as far as size of message on YouTube and Twitch and others, they're right in my zone. And I would like to say, for the record, Twitch people, I love you, and I want to have your babies, because every time we raid Midas Touch, we send more people to their chat than they have in their chat, and I'm very proud of that fact. Yes, they're mostly a YouTube thing, but they definitely have a Twitch presence, which is cool. But every time we raid them, we got more people going there than they have in there, and I think that's awesome. I think that's great. I appreciate you guys being here, and I appreciate that we can send a solid crowd. I feel seen. Yeah, I'm so glad we can send a solid crowd of people over there at that. Someday chat will be impossible to keep up in chat. Gives you said. Well, I might actually. You can always just go. You can block some stuff. I'll figure out how to break it back up so that you only have to watch each other individually if you want to isolate, because the chat's going to get easier to manage too. Midas Touch is great. I agree. Love doing the raids. Excellent. And I love sending the raids. And I love that Johnny Million sends a raid. I've been at Midas Touch. That's funny. Okay. You found me from the. Oh, that's nice, Sandra. Excellent. His name was Rico. He wore a diamond. Raids are indeed awesome. There's a version of it on YouTube that supposedly was supposed to happen, and then it fucking didn't, and aggravated me. That said, why is the thing such an issue? A do. Okay, I guess not. All right. There we go. Okay. Good Lord. My aspect ratio gets so cattywampus. Get at it. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Fixed it. I love that. Now Phil, when he comes on, can actually see me. Philip Bitner will be joining us from Kiev in a little bit, in about half an hour, at the top of the next hour, to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. There's been huge breakthroughs. We will deal with some of that, but I want to save up for that. Would love to see how go on Rogan. I've been on Rogan. I have. And I doubt he will ever have me back on unless everyone subscribes. We have 1 million subscribers, and he's just I become a star fucking guest, which is that's how we have to do it. You want a cat cam? The cat cam is there. There just aren't any cats where it would normally be. So if one of them comes in, and they will at some point, I will send that. I promise. How do I join which thing? Yeah, fuck Joe Rogan. Well, no, I'll just talk to him. Thank you. That said, I feel like, and this is a thing for CSL as well, I feel like we should grab some of the Joe Rogan clips on occasion and deal with some of that horseshit occasionally. Although I don't know that what his copyright litigiousness is like. Also, I've been on Rogan, and the reason I don't think he'd have me back is because we differ specifically on drugs. As many of you know, I'm straight edge, and he believes that until you've had drugs, you're not a whole person. And I think you're a whole person whether you do drugs or not. And that is intrinsically the line. Ethically, morally, intellectually, philosophically, psychosexually, that's the line between me and Joe Rogan. He thinks you're not you until you've done DMT or whatever the fuck. And I think you are. And I think, drugs are fast food enlightenment. And again, I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum, but I'm also not going to, I wouldn't stand there while somebody says I'm half a fucking person because, I haven't drank some goo in a fucking hut in South America. Get the fuck out of here. Because I think when you do drugs, you're you plus drugs. You are now forever you carrying around this backpack full of whatever drugs have done to your thought process, good or bad. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying it's an addendum. It's not an intrinsically missing part. Period. Yeah, ayahuasca, DMT, all that shit. Again, if you want to do it, knock yourself out. I just think you're already everything you need, and all that enlightenment, all that vision, all that spiritual awakening is already there. It's already inborn. And it's it's like using a trampoline to jump instead of working on your box jump. That's all right. And again, do what you. I'm not here to yuck your yum. I'm just telling you how I feel about it, and that's also yes. I've always been straight edge. I again, there are a lot of people in the chat and stuff that smoke weed or whatever. Totally fine. Whatever you do. That said, I don't think most of you believe that you weren't you until you had it. That you didn't have that you were half a person, or that humanity itself, that every baby that's born isn't a actualized human being until they get to an age and someone gives it drugs. It's just fucking weird. Know what I mean? I am indeed high on life. So yeah, I mean it's a very distinct thing. It's very different from people who just approve of it or do it or think it's interesting. It is distinctly the idea that you can't be a complete human being without it. That's fucked up. And there's not a situation where I'm gonna bend on my feelings about that ever. I find that absurd. Now, granted, the mushroom Neanderthal theory that Neanderthals or any other early humans, part of their elevation and why we jumped forward as a species a couple of times because they stumbled across the right mushrooms. There may be something to that. A bunch of them died when it happened because not everybody had the same reaction. But that the idea that one of them, it might have awakened one of them to an idea that, hey, maybe I'm not hearing voices from God. Maybe it's just I've got two lobes of my brain and they're conversing. And I'm whatever their moment of their oh shit moment was when they saw the monolith and started throwing rocks at it. The idea that happened to Neanderthals or something is fine, and that somebody might have survived because they had an idea because they were drugged at the time that led them forward or whatever. But the Neanderthal brain is so limited that if that happened, if that happened, it would be a force accelerator, but not a civilizer. It wouldn't open their mind. It would simply keep parts of their brain from being closed that aren't functioning or whatever. It's the important thing is that once you become an advanced human, once we get past that point, once our brain starts separating more into two halves and our thinking gets more complex, the value of it goes precipitously down. I don't like Rogan because he constantly shits on Garth Brooks. Huh, I didn't know that. I would like to say that according to my dad, Garth Brooks is lovely. He met him a little while back, apparently. Joe Rogan is like Elon Musk. People think they're so smart and forward thinkers when in reality they're morons that just parrot others' ideas. Yeah, I mean, there's increasingly and these might be characters born specifically out of social media. Because there will be a point where what we call social media is going to mature. It's going to get into its silver hair years. Right now, I got to say, it's still, it's physically in its 20s, and it's intellectually in its teens. And so the behavior and function of it is exactly that. See, most of the time, the interactions you see on social media are somewhere in the, even at their most mature, high school. And but materially, the available technology has matured into its, let's say it all started in 2002 in any kind of like specific way. Oh, you think the singer did from the Killers on stage, bringing the Russian dude on? He got booed for it. And rightly so. Yes, hormones raging, absolutely. Well, it used to be a joke about. My joke about America versus other countries. Summer and Ethan were just in Italy, and they went to the Pantheon, and the fucking building is from like 220 AD, and it's still standing, and it's gorgeous, and it's just kind of amazing. And all of these countries have been through their dictatorship multiple times, by the way. Whether it's a Roman leader who's completely out of their mind like Caligula, or it's fucking Mussolini in the case of Italy, or any of these other, countries that went from autocracies to some semblance of a monarchy or a democracy, or attempting to do it and falling back, all that over history, nobody gets to skip a step in their maturation process, including the United States. We were just lucky that our Hitler was a complete doofus and came out of the cracking of the egg of social media. This is exactly the kind of celebrities and politicians that would naturally occur as we have seen social media expand and turn into what it's going to be, and then it becomes part of your, like, remember when that guy was that thing long time ago? That arc of maturation happens with just about everything, and it's happening with social media. And Trump is exactly like the early social media president. He's the president that completely tracks with, like, Instagram causing eating disorders in teenage girls and revenge porn and all that shit. Like, stuff that we will eventually develop laws against, or we will stop doing, or it will be relegated to the parlors and getters of the world. But if you want to participate in the greater social media marketplace, there will be, the terms of service will get tighter, cleaner, and smarter, because they'll have to. But in the interim, in this naive opening of this concept, before you find out what the problems are. And this is, I mean, think about how you learn to date, for fuck's sake. When you're open to people and you get hurt and you're like, okay, not going to do that again. You create red flags that you're not, lines you won't cross, limits you have. You might even expand it based on, oh, that was great, we should have that everywhere, whatever it is. So, but that process is going to be a tough one. And during, Tinder, fucking hell, look at all the millennial comedians, the fucking Tinder jokes. Like, there was a point where I was on the road where I would argue half of of the jokes coming in the opening acts that were opening for me on the road, not Charlene and the people I bring with me, but the local who's either hosting or something like that, great people, but half of their stuff is based on Tinder at some point. Todd, you have to reference something specific about delusion. Is it because you don't think we don't believe you can get a suntan from Trump's ass? Is that where you think we're delusional? I would just disagree on all merits of that argument. Walk in a room full of people and there's pot smoke hanging in the air. Do you stay or leave? I'd more than likely leave. I do the same thing with cigarette smoke, though, too. Or if somebody had a fire burning and somehow it was not ventilated properly. Yeah. Put some pants on before going to Walmart. I agree. So, let's see. Hey, Texas Paul. Texas Paul, I would love to have you back on. We'll make an arrangement to do that. Trump's ass is constantly covered in shit, and it's the need for diaper. Well, yes, that's the idea. Your delusions are delusional. What's your opinion of Lex Fridman? I think he's popular because he's playing Charlie Rose. He's doing like a one-man show, like a young Charlie Rose. That's what he's doing. And there's a gap because Charlie Rose is gone because of his shenanigans. And that gap itself, I would argue that people in a noisy world, it's easier and easier to assume that someone who's quiet is doing so because they are smart, not because they are stupid. Especially because the greater opinion of the internet in general, even by people who like it and use it, is that it's full of the stupids. I'm wearing a shirt that says antisocial. Did you get it at Hot Topic with your pre-printed anarchy shirt? Texas Paul is a great guest. I agree. I remember the George Carlin joke, it's the quiet ones you got to watch. Yeah. Meanwhile, some loud motherfucker will kill you. It isn't the quiet ones you got to watch. That in and of itself is a meaningless phrase, because if you notice, most people are quiet. It's the uncomfortably quiet people you have to watch. Most people just do their shit and just move on. But it's the ones who are oddly quiet. Those are the ones usually like, that motherfucker just sits there and does not say anything. Right. Although I would argue that the quiet ones you got to watch, I would just say Ted Bundy, Charles Manson. Is obviously, we think Trump will really go once convicted. Well, the idea is that the only area where he can't talk himself out of jail time is Georgia. The question is, do they actually give him? Does he, in the sentencing hearing, even though it has a mandatory minimum, can they make extenuating circumstances because he's old? Which they will try. If they don't plea, right? If they don't try to create a plea deal. The question is if he goes for a plea, the minute he goes for a plea deal, people are like, fuck, he's guilty. But we know that he's not above saying only the mob pleads the fifth and then pleading the fifth. So I wouldn't rule a deal out. But effectively, that's what a lot of them are going to do. I just don't want to see the inside of a jail. I will plead to something lesser that's not part of this, because I was a cog in the wheel. Now, he's the one at the top of the... Here's the argument. I'll show you what it really breaks down to. There's two defenses here that you'll see, which is these folks are going to try to stay out of jail by saying he told me to. I did what he told me to, and I'll cop to it. I thought I was doing what was right. Some of it was funky, but he was the president of the United States, and I thought I was just following orders. They're going to try and use that, and it's a reasonable defense. It's not true, and you're trying to manipulate the system, and you're a liar and a crook, but that's how it actually works, okay? That's what they're going to try. And they don't have to believe it to try it. They just have to try it, okay? And they're going to try and kick their, have their case severed from that one because they felt like they're scooped up in this. They didn't participate in that chunk of it. They were just part of the bullshit litigation, and that bullshit litigation was not tied to because she'd been kicked out. Like Jen Ellis is going to be probably one of the first people to make this case. That I was under him, and I didn't go as far as he went. As a matter of fact, I started to move off, and I went over to RNC or whatever and get the fuck out. Yeah, she'll do time if she doesn't make some sort of deal. So you're saying I have to wait until I'm 70 for my shot at an overthrow? Yes, you do. Now, so their defense is going to be he told me to. His defense is going to be I was just trying to protect the elections. They did all this crooked shit because I was telling them to just, I believed I'd won the election, and I believed I had the right as the president of the United States to guarantee the integrity of elections by hook or by crook, by any means necessary, because democracy is the most important thing. It's a dumb argument because it doesn't work. It's not how anything works. But that's what he'll say. And so the interesting thing is that they can say I was just following him, and it doesn't necessarily throw him under the bus, because he can say in response, they misunderstood. I didn't want them to do anything illegal. I wanted them to do whatever it took. When I said whatever it took within the confines of the law and blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm just telling you how the defense is going to go. I don't agree with any of this argument. It's stupid, but this is how it's going to, these are their options, and they suck. They're going to, if they throw it at him, he made me do it. He can defend himself, and then they think everybody goes home. If he throws them under the bus, they stay there, all of them. Because his only defense is every one of these fuckers broke the law, and I didn't tell them to. I told them to, do the right thing and fix the real problem, and they did all this stuff. Yay, 250K home. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and being part of the Blue Patch Brigade. It's lovely. It's a good thing. Was that Pinot Noir leaking out of Rudy's head? No, I think it was oil can. Oh, it's the probability of Trump being convicted in Georgia. Very high. He will plead out no way he risks jail time. He's a coward. I agree, 50 plus, because again, that goes to the idea that he is. We've seen from him pleading the fifth and stuff. He has no real standard for anything. He'll just manipulate the system in any way that he can. It's not like he's too proud to do that. He will ultimately try to save his own ass. And the way you know that is that this alleged billionaire is paying his legal bills with donations from the maggot saps that support him instead of out of his own coffers. If he's the billionaire he says he is, literally he could spend $250 million on his legal defense, hiring the best people and just throwing money at the problem, and he wouldn't get off scot-free because the evidence is there, but he could use every angle of the fucking law to get himself out, or to lessen the impact. One juror is all he needs. Right. And I think that would be some of the money, maybe saving his money to offer one of them $1 billion. But then, of course, then he really goes to jail. Because that's the problem with the RICO charge. You start fucking with witnesses, it's interesting. Like, they'll go after that. They'll watch that element more than almost anything else. And the jury selection process is going to be a fucking tooth pull. Video game controller throws a face down to rage. Oh, thank you, Blue Karma. Who's next to go broke for Trump? All of them. Yeah. I hope he goes to jail for me. Well, it certainly will be an adventure. I think it's one of those things where at the sentencing, you're going to see him with a walker with, pulling a Weinstein or a Golden State Killer. I don't know where I am. And then they show him golfing, in between. Like, all right, Your Honor, my client is incapable of understanding what's going on. He is a man of advanced age and of shit diet. But I'm beautiful. Shut the fuck up, dude. I'm trying to keep you out of jail. And he can't understand anything that's going on. So we would like a recess until next week, because maybe we can have sentencing then, because I don't think his heart can take it, Your Honor. All right, recess till next week or whatever. And then he would golf over the fucking weekend. Because that's fucking Trump. Judge Relax, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the Trump? Trump's response, I will take a firth. Yes. Biden family members received money from foreign nationals. Wow. No, they didn't. And also, Biden whole family members received money from foreign nationals. You do realize it's not illegal to have multinational businesses at all? You do realize that's legal. It's not a quid pro quo unless there was the quid was for a quo. And you can argue that Jared Kushner's $3 billion from the Saudi wealth, the Saudi wealth fund to start his venture capital hedge fund thing, it's a much bigger fish, one would think. The idea is that, and this is a constant belief system amongst the Trumpies, that they're just rending their garments about this shit or whatever. But Trump had a secret Chinese bank account. And while he was president of the United States, after he killed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was the trade deal set up to be a bulwark against Chinese industrial hegemony in the South, in Southeast Asia, allowing countries like Malaysia and Vietnam and South Korea and Japan and to some degree India and others, certainly, and Australia, who was part of it, to coordinate their trade with the United States, Canada, and Mexico, so that the manipulation of the currency in China and their use of slave labor would not allow China to lower their costs and work around, by tariffing what was coming out of China and allowing these guys to have a break. kind of even the playing field a little bit, so they could compete on the value of their goods. And Trump, on his second day in office, killed the TPP. And this Chinese bank account that he'd had for years, which had never had more than a couple of $1,000s in it, suddenly had $17.3 million in it. He himself, while president of the United States, this isn't like while vice president, his cousin fucking hired a dude that knew a guy, any of that shit. Directly, Donald Trump got a payment into that account after he killed TPP and then took $15 million out. Personally took out $15 million from that account in 2017 while president of the United States himself. He didn't have Don do it. He didn't have Eric do it. He himself did it. So if the big fear is that the Biden family, that you don't think Hunter Biden was qualified to be on the board of Burisma and he doesn't know anything about oil and gas and blah, blah, blah. Well, what he guaranteed was that he wouldn't steal the investors' money that was supposed to go to Burisma and fuck off to Russia. He solved that. But and that's why Burisma is a functioning company right now. Whereas Donald Trump, for example, attempted to aid China as soon as he got in office. He did them a huge fucking favor as soon as he got in office. Killing the TPP, which he, and guaranteing that nothing like it, even if he hated elements of it, because every trade deal's got stuff you might have renegotiated, but he just killed it flat out. And there is a CPTPP, which is a version of the TPP that does not involve the United States, that has kind of limped along behind the scenes, and the Biden administration has kind of rebuilt it by organizing trade between Japan and Malaysia and Vietnam and Canada and Mexico, and working together with our trade partners to try and even that shit out. So, and instead of it being one fell swoop as a trade deal, just negotiating on a unilateral basis based on the structure that the CPTPP put together, which is very close to what we were shooting for. But we've had to go through all this fucking line by line work on it, and just to push back on China. Just to stop them from basically eliminating all their competition in the South China Seas, in throughout Southeast Asia. And Trump guaranteed it as soon as he got into office. January 23rd, 2017, 2 days after he got in office, signed an executive order getting us out of TPP. A couple weeks later, $17 million shows up in his bank account, and he withdraws 15 of it right away. My question is if you're really a billionaire, billions, think about how much money $9 billion is, and you're president of the United States at the same time. That's the part, Kelly. That's the part that I find weird. Would you, even if you knew that was criminal or it looked bad or any of that shit, wouldn't you just leave that $15 million alone until you left office? Or have somebody else in your company funnel it through something else so that it wasn't so directly hanging? He was so, as what oil uses it? What is that? I don't even know what you're saying, Jess. It sounds funky. But would you take that money out yourself and be so overt about it? If you had a fucking brain in your head? Yes, $1 billion is 1,000 million. Exactly. Would you need, if you had $9,000 million, would you need 15 desperately? But he did. He literally took it out. He didn't care. And our dear friend Philip Bitner is with us. Excellent. I will bring him in just 1 second. I want to remind everybody to like, subscribe, give a thumbs up, support the show. Where's my little thing? There it is. Later on today, we're going to have, I have no doubt we will have a spectacular show because there's so much craziness going on in the world. But the reactions, oh my Lord, to the new Trump indictments are truly something special, ladies and gentlemen. They are so far. And there's a bunch of these folks, obviously. Oh, you do, and you'll clean it up.
Okay. Пока-пока.
Look at that. We got to hear Philip speaking a fancy language. Hold on, I'm
Russian.
going to train. Yes, he's speaking Russian. Welcome, sir. Hi, Philip Bitner. Good to see you. How you doing, brother?
Yeah.
What's
Good.
going on? How goes it? Hello.
Hot.
It's hot there.
Scorching. Yeah.
Well, there's that sort of does not surprise me because there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously.
It's not Vegas.
Yeah. Although I will say, I rolled in at 5 a.m. this morning because in the immortal words of John Bon Jovi, I drive all night just to get back home. And I did. And when I rolled in, I mean, it is 5 a.m., so it's going to be like the coolest part of the day. It was lovely out. And there was a weirdly cool breeze yesterday before I left in the afternoon, even though it was hot, even though the Vegas sun was burning down on me. There was this weird.
I like that.
Yeah, it's nice.
The thing is, I find when you travel to places where there are extreme weather,
yes,
people compensate. So, they don't do AC very well here, but in the winter, it's a sauna. When there's snow outside and it's minus 20.
It's the opposite of Vegas. Vegas. And then you need a parka to see a movie.
And then you go to the Persian Gulf. You go down to the Persian Gulf,
right?
And you can literally hang meat. It's 120 Fahrenheit outside, but inside you can see your breath. So people tend to compensate, I find.
Indeed. Yeah. In Vegas, if you you have more danger of hypothermia in a casino than you do of heat stroke out here.
Vegas wouldn't exist without AC.
Oh my God. No yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got hooked up to a nuclear power plant earlier than anybody, I think, just because the volume of air conditioners, like the Defense Department recognized it as a necessity. But let's get started with because the chat room is always wondering. Yeah, how are you doing? What's going on there?
Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah. What's the latest?
Well, we got a couple of things. We got some movement out on the other side of the Dnipro River. It looks like they're closing in a town called Robotin. And if they are headed towards Robotin, the Ukrainians, it means they're probably headed towards Melitopol as opposed to Mariupol. And we've discussed this in the past. Along the Sea of Azov, the eastern shore of the Black Sea, Ukrainian held territory in the coastal waters of the Black Sea, there's this even smaller part called the Sea of Azov. And the Sea of Azov has Mariupol on it, which is, this huge port city. I say huge. It's a big port city, strategically really important. The Ukrainians fought like, we're not on the radio. Good. They fought like hell to keep it.
Right.
They lost it. But it's that entire stretch of the coastline is part of the land bridge that leads to Crimea. Yeah. Now, if they are headed to Robotin, it means that they are on the road to the next strategic location, which would be a town called Tokmak. Tokmak is the hub where all the roads come from or go to. So that is strategically important. But again, it also it telegraphs where they're going. It informs you that they made a decision not to go due east and take Mariupol, but rather to go southeast and try and grab Melitopol, which is a comparatively thinner stretch between the Sea of Azov and the Dnipro River. So that's a choke point that they can close off, cut off the land bridge, and the Russians will fucking go crazy. They will lose their minds, because it will be the first time that the general population in Russia, I believe, will become aware of the possibility that there really is a possibility they could lose Crimea.
Right.
Which is really important to them, not only strategically, economically, but also in their sense of identity and sense of self, because that's their access to a warm water port It was taken by Catherine the Great back when George Washington was fighting the Revolution. Catherine was taking Crimea. That's how far back it goes and how integral it is to their sense of self.
Right.
So if they can cut off the land bridge, not only will they stop supplies going to Crimea to continue, or supply, or armed forces coming out of Crimea, if they can sever the land bridge, it's going to be a huge shock to the system for the Russians.
Right.
So we'll have to see what happens. They're about 45 miles roughly, give or take. I think it was miles, not kilometers, to Melitopol. So it's doable. It's doable. And they apparently have, a lot of people are making a big deal of this today, is the fact that they have mobilized the 82nd Air Assault Brigade, which is I've heard about the 82nd for much of this war. My buddy who writes for the Kiev Post and is the defense correspondent for the Kiev Post, and who knows every single unit and every single, I mean, he can tell you, everything about every single unit. He's very meticulous about that kind of stuff. And generally I kind of go for more bigger picture stuff. But he said to me, or he has said to me many times, how impressive the 82nd is. The 82nd is fully kitted out with Western equipment. So they have Marder self-propelled guns from Germany. They have Stryker infantry fighting vehicles. I have been in Strykers before in both Afghanistan and Iraq. They are a fine piece of kit. I would feel safer in a Bradley, but a Stryker is much more mobile. It's a wheeled vehicle. It's not a tractor vehicle. It's much more open so that you can mount and dismount a lot easier. It's airier. It's more spacious, and you can also bottle it up and control weaponry. And Stryker is a very good piece of kit. They have those, but most importantly, the 82nd has Challenger 2 main battle tanks from the Brits. The Brits gave Challenger 2s to the Ukrainians, and they've given a good portion of those to the 82nd. The Challenger is one of the best NATO main battle tanks, aside from the Abrams. It constantly wins. NATO always has these tank competitions every year. The Challenger 2 has repeatedly performed very well at those exhibitions. It's the Challenger is a very, very Challenger 2 is a very, very good piece of kit. This is not a joke. This is not a drill. These guys, this is the cream of the crop. These are the guys. This is one of the best units, about 2,000 men. Again, as I outlined, all the Western equipment. This is one of the guys that they have kept in reserve until they've gotten to a point where they think that maybe they could, put them forward and make a breakthrough. So we shall see. We shall see what's going on. But it's a pretty big deal militarily that they're doing that. On the diplomatic front.
Real quick, I put this map online so people could see, but this is the narrowness. That's the choke point you're talking about. So right here, where they've made this bit of progress in the last little bit, this chunk right here anyways, they've pushed this part back. There's definitely a move through this point, and this is the space they have to clear. If they can break this line, if they can separate this, that is the beginning of, first of all, a lot of the support arms and stuff for the upper area comes via Crimea and Sevastopol and up into the fighting area. So you sever that. That's the game in a lot of ways for the support for this stuff up in the north. If I can pull out here, you'll see what I mean. So this stuff comes in through here, it comes in over here, and it goes up this way through here. And if they cut this off, which is the thinnest spot in all of this that gets to the sea, and it's close to the Russian border. It's definitely dangerous to go there, but it is the easiest space to claim. And there's a reason why, in terms of landings and whatnot, why the Russians at Mariupol down here, they supply a lot of their stuff to that as well from just here. It's a quick jaunt across. It's not as quick as this, obviously, but it's, there are these short points that they use over here to get stuff into the battlefield if they can't go via train tracks and via trucks and all that kind of shit. But if you can cut this off right here, you can basically, they lose all of these landing points over time because they can't protect them, and then you can't send stuff in unless it's protected, because if you do, you'll lose it. It'll never make ground because, you know, that you don't know if there's a missile system or an artillery battery or something that gets set up or taken. If they take a Russian artillery system or battery system and they just turn it around, because they know how to run them, you're in deep shit. It's just like this is a huge part of this move, and it seems to be the direction they're going. It does. It feels like that's what it is.
It looks like they've decided to go for Melitopol and not Mariupol.
Right.
So I think you want to go a little south of that.
Yes. So there's Mariupol. This is
there it is. You see that little delta?
Yes. This guy, because it's all water.
So that's actually not. There's a little bit. There's a strip of land. This is kind of like it's like a delta. It's swampy. There's a nature reserve down there.
Yes, I see. So you could actually cut off right here because it's under the pink of this, so it's hard to tell. But you get across here. This water keeps everything out over here. This is this is a much shorter break.
Right above that inlet there.
Yeah.
Is the city of Melitopol.
You cover this part from there.
Fight for Melitopol, or whether or not it will fall because it's Ukrainian. But it's 45, I believe, miles from where they are. So Robotin looks like it's about to fall to Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, here's Tokmak, and Robotin is right here.
Robotin is,
I think, right?
Is right there.
Yeah.
So it's about 15 miles to Tokmak, which would be a strategically important victory for the Ukrainians.
Right. That's this area.
Because then you have all the roads. But then in addition to that, if they can push further another 30 miles south to get to Melitopol, it's done. It's done. It's done, and the land bridge gets cut off. The second I'm telling you how I've been so frustrated throughout this entire campaign when this counteroffensive got launched and everybody was doing armchair generaling and all the rest of it. I was continually saying, just it's going to be slow and steady and nothing flashy, and then we will see at some point we will see something, because they've got to break the land bridge. If they can break the land bridge, the Russians are going to lose their shit. They're going to go absolutely crazy, because it will be obvious that there is the very real possibility they lose the Crimean Peninsula, which for them is a huge blow.
According to this recent map, Robotin, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly.
Robotin.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that is right here. That's taken apparently. They are that's it. So the Russians are hitting it.
But
they're not there.
It was a little iffy as to whether or not they actually controlled it or not.
Well, they had sent like 3 days ago. They had sent a probe force. Yeah, they sent some scouts in, and apparently what they found out was that you could get it, and they did. And so the Russians have fallen back all the way to here and are just bombing it. That's what that is. Yeah. 1 person killed, 4 wounded as a result of Russian shell. And this is whatever is it here.
I'm telling you, this is not over by a long shot. There's a good month, if not 2 months. What are we? Middle of August, middle of September, middle of October. Yeah, there's a good 6 to 8 weeks left in this fighting season.
And if they sever this and then they lock down for the winter part of it, that's an atrophy move.
That's a game changer, and it's a huge blow to Russia, and it will be the victory that the Ukrainians need to secure further support, and to remind, if the West doesn't lose its, as the Brits would say, lose its bottle. As long as the West sticks this out, and there's some troubling talk in the last 36, 48 hours, there have been discussions coming out of the West about let's enter into negotiations.
And that was one of the NATO people. That seems to float, I have to say. That seems to float on like on a lazy Susan of stuff. I would argue.
Well, I mean,
I would argue that one of the ways that you push back on the PR front with this idea that the tankies float, that we only want war and we don't want peace and blah, 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 is that you let somebody or you instruct somebody within the NATO alliance or someplace to go, we need to start negotiations and we've got to negotiate. And it comes out on the regular as kind of a, so it doesn't look like this monolithic warmongering, blah, that narrative can't really gain any steam. It can't gain any ground in that regard.
Yes. Yeah, but unfortunately, the West has shown itself in certain instances to be pretty weak-kneed about some of this stuff. Because there is this question of like, what happens if this causes the disintegration of the Russian Federation, which is a very real possibility. No matter what people say, it's a very real possibility because for a variety of different reasons, it's too big, it grew too quickly. It's built on a center of gravity in Moscow that if it falls apart, the center can't hold and things start to fray.
Well, then again, that part of this strategy though, because the idea is that let's say you're right about the next 6 weeks. Rumblings start, they start bitching about it, and then they sever that point off and then go, we're taking everything south of here, including Crimea, and we'll negotiate your exit from there. But you can have part of the Donetsk, Luhansk, not above us a little bit. And that's where the argument starts. Now, I don't think it will turn into a real agreement in that regard, but it would be incredibly embarrassing for Putin and brutal for him to lose Crimea and then go, all right, let's talk. And then they're like, you imagine
Ukraine is bargaining from a position of strength as well.
Right.
No, my only concern, Hal, is that the West is playing. How do I put this properly? How do I put this, in the right way? That the West is pursuing its interests here, to be expected. That's what that's what nation states do. The problem is if they try to force the Ukrainians to accept something because of the leverage they have over Kiev, and whether or not because look, the West and in particular the Europeans are terrified of Russia and of the disintegration of Russia, of Russia's potential aggression that it can still exert in the European continent. In the years between 2014 and 2022, when they had the observation teams that were in there, the monitoring teams that are in there, I have heard so many stories about the Europeans being completely feckless and being like, oh, we don't want to piss off Moscow. God forbid we piss off Moscow.
Yeah.
And I think that attitude still exists in Brussels in particular, and in Berlin in many ways, in particular amongst the nation states that make up NATO. And also just there's a general kind of like, oh my God, I'm terrified of war. Oh my God, the Russians have nukes. Oh my God, just shut it down, just in the war. However, there's that movement that is very real within the West.
Right.
So yes, it could be some sort of PR ploy to like not seem as monolithic. It could be a PR ploy to float this idea so that there are things to be discussed at the negotiation table. There's a lot of reasons why it may not be true, but I have a really uncomfortable gut feeling that it is sincere and that the West is like, just shut it down. Great, Ukraine, you made victories, we supported you, but just give them a little something so that they can go away save face and this war ends.
Yeah, I feel like I agree, but I think like I think Blinken, and I also think Blinken and Sullivan specifically aren't stupid enough to think that'll work. The issue is you cannot solve this problem with a 2014 brain. When you're like, this idea that, they did this quickly, but it's better off we just, it happened, it's over, we're done. They're negotiating now, we'll just stop. There's no trust for that anymore. And this is, Gary Kasparov wrote a piece, I believe for the Kiev Post or whatever, and kind of expressing the concerns that you're talking about, like.
Well, there's also a history of Ukraine being trade by the West.
Right. Well, that's the idea, is that the problem is there's also a history of Ukraine not being the West and shifting from being the West. And then the people running it, you can't trust them with actual arms because they would hand it over to the Russians and it get used against the Ukrainians. So they're I think there's sort of a year zero situation you find yourself in Ukraine in terms of governance right now, because you've got an actual president. You've got a guy who was popularly elected. He's actually brooming out the corruption. He's, piece by piece. It's a long slog. They're trying to get it out. And he is trying to avoid, it seems, becoming Rudy Giuliani, where I believe in all this talk about Rudy Giuliani getting the mob out of New York. What Rudy was really doing was making room for the Russian and Chinese mobs, that he was helping to effectively broom the Italians out, as an Italian, which is, I guess the perfect weapon, so that the Russians and the Chinese could move into New York, which is exactly what happened. So there's a danger of going, okay, we'll broom out the corruption, and then there'll be another version of that corruption that will just move in. We've got to actually stabilize so we're a functioning economy that people can invest in. So in the long term, we have a reason for existing. And there's so much industry and so much stuff in Ukraine worth using. There's minerals, and there's actually a decent tech sector. It's unlike, there's a ton of stuff there. Yeah, unlike
military-industrial complex.
Right. Unlike the Czech Republic or any of these other states where there's kind of I don't quite know. I mean, Czech Republic is now if you check, most of your IKEA stuff is now coming from the Czech Republic, and Czech Republic has got a great industry boxing up iPhones. After the iPhones are made, they are often sent to the Czech Republic to get boxed. It's a weird thing, but that's their, your country has to have an industry that it can kind of put its stamp on and do that. Ukraine has several. Some countries only have one, and so the graft, like Romania, the graft in Romania and Hungary, quite frankly, is around the fact that other than being a tourist site, nobody knows what the fucking country is for anymore, other than just being Romanians and being Hungarians, which is fine. But as far as import-export goes and the strength of your worth amongst other countries, Ukraine has a shit ton of stuff that none of these countries have. And so stabilizing it actually can be a functioning industrial superpower eventually.
It's a powerhouse.
Yes, exactly. Powerhouse. So, but for the first time, it's always had those materials. Since the Soviet Union collapsing, it's had the kind of intellectual base. It didn't seem to face the same anti-intellectualism that parts of Russia did after the Cold War collapsed, where once they weren't fighting with us about satellites and nuclear weapons anymore, everybody just went into professional drinking. And Ukraine didn't necessarily do that because of the grain industry and because of minerals and that kind of stuff. There was enough of that there, oil and gas. So there was corruption, but it was based on actual industry as opposed to flat out just arms sales corruption in Russia.
And one of the world's top food exporters.
Exactly. Right. That's what I mean.
Not a joke.
No. And there's something genuinely to grow there. Other countries, when they're fighting to try to get rid of their autocrats or build something, Turkey's running through this as well. It's hard to argue other than you're, being a port and a parking lot for certain ships. What's Turkey doing these days? What are they contributing to the world in general as far as products and services? Like India is becoming the new China as far as pharmaceutical and mechanics, just manufacturing in general. So Ukraine has a possibility. That's why Germany, I think, dragged its feet, because Germany sees Ukraine as real potential, competition, right? Yeah. Especially if they're firing on all cylinders and they don't have the ghost of this fight behind. If they move back to the 91 borders like that, after a rebuild, Ukraine is bullying Germany around if Germany becomes a dick. That's what their concern is. So I think there is a year zero that has nothing to do with the U.S.'s history with them before, because you're operating with a different set of. It's like if you had a corrupt mayor and a small town and all this stuff, and then it changed leadership, the whole town's fine again, and you go, all right, we got to make sure it's fine before you get federal funds, but we definitely want to help, but we're a little shy about, we need to, check and verify everything because of how you guys used to be. So there's no, and everybody there going, we have a history of you guys not giving us what we need. Well, you weren't you guys before. You were you guys plus a bunch of Russians who were trying to destroy, undermine you. So that's where I think there is no history in that regard, because it's just a factor. It's a brand new Ukraine. It really, really is. It's got a
Yeah,
history
in a
as
lot
far
of
as the
ways.
people, but the
Yeah.
political structure is pretty fucking brand new. Now,
As
the other,
as a
yeah,
nation state, it's
yes,
relatively young because it has always been a vassal state
right,
of Moscow. And now that it is actually going to be free of that, and it won't be um, you know
thank
like
you,
the
DW.
money going all industry uh, bled like a sieve.
Hmm.
It was just money was going money
Yeah,
was going to Moscow.
right,
Everything that a good chunk of it was skimmed right off the top and sent to the oligarchs in Moscow. Local Kiev Ukrainian oligarchs would take a pinch, and then they would send it all. And now that's changed. So
right,
you're legitimately sovereign. So in many
yeah,
ways, you're right. It is almost like dealing with a new country.
yep,
Now the Americans, look, I mean, the one thing that worries me about America and
hmm,
its support for Ukraine is, well, there's a couple of things, but I'm not crazy about some of the dragging of the feet of not sending like S-16s or the ATACMs.
hmm,
I understand it in some ways, but I think we're being too cautious when it comes to stuff like that. Just
sure,
like we were too cautious with the HIMARS or
right,
the Abrams or the Patriot. We should have just realized that this conflict, we're involved in this conflict, and
right,
we need to give the whatever weapons the Ukrainians need to defend themselves. We need to do it. So that ticks me off a little. But then also this like war weariness of again this sentiment that I see stronger in America than I do see in Europe. Europe's got its machinations because they're right on the doorstep with
right.
Russia and Ukraine. America has this like malaise and this kind of, and also the us being so divided that if
Right.
Biden is for Ukraine by default, there are the
Certain groups
idiots
are
that
against
are
it.
that
Well,
are
I will say, even in spite of that, it's oddly bipartisan within a stretch of people, because there are a bunch of
yes,
senators I
the
can't
ones that
fucking
matter.
stand, and even Sean Hannity angrily defends, supporting Ukraine these days. It's an
Yes.
interesting take. It's the one area where he's got a no-go zone, which I appreciate. I don't know why he's dug in on this, and maybe it's a habitual hatred of the Russians, or he just recognizes the threat legitimately, and it's just one area where he's not like blindly loyal to the stupidity. But he doesn't suffer that shit lightly, and he used it as a wedge to go after RFK. I mean, he wants to give RFK enough room to attack Biden, but he won't let him cross the line into attacking anything that he
Yeah.
likes personally. And that's and in dealing with Ukraine, that was specifically part of it. Same thing with
Yeah.
what's his name, the Josh Hawley, and others. Like, of all the things, that's the one area where they're like not moving, which is a good thing. And that means,
It is a good thing.
yes, it means that Biden has the votes everywhere, including
Yeah.
with Kevin McCarthy, to get the like funds and munitions that we'll need for Ukraine for a good long while. The only issue we have is if we run out of the funding that's effectively slushed in the defense bill that allows us, and Lend-Lease has given us a lot of room to move. So, because we're not technically selling stuff that we have for good, and we're not donating it, it's, we're going to get paid back. And once we signed on to that, it's very expansive and does not require kind of a constant re-upping. The funds that we're sending and that need re-upping occasionally are more for economic support of Ukraine, and, the internal support that they might need to make sure that they're meeting their bond payments or any of that shit while their
Right.
currency's been under attack. And
Mhm.
one of the things that happened, the latest kerfuffle was the cluster bombs. Like, when there was a week long, 9 days of dear God, will they or
Wringing
won't
of
they, back and
hands
forth,
and clutching of
right?
pearls. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it ultimately, it didn't do shit.
No,
And yeah, and
of course
so
not.
yeah, and which is good.
Idiotic.
It like
It
they
was an
got them.
idiotic
They're
argument.
using them, and then there's been this footage, and I don't know if like I definitely cannot play it, but people can find it. There's online if they want to look at it. But around the area we were just talking about, in Rabadnya. This is Eurozine. Yeah, Eurozine, whatever. Anyways, it was, yeah, they apparently the Russians got overwhelmed by Ukrainian small arms fire and tanks and shit like that, and they bugged the fuck out. And they all, like an entire like battalion of them just bailed and were running randomly. And they got hit, and you can see this is the area where they're running, you know, in the video, they are running across this area. Lots of men fleeing this area and escaping through here. And this is what the cluster munition did to the ground around them. This is that smoke. I'm not going to play this to that. And people can go watch it if they want to. But this particular cluster munition hits an area about 3 football fields wide. And that encompasses the entire area where this group was bailing out. Some abandoning their weapons and fleeing, none surrendering. You know, again, the problem with them fleeing the area is that Russia has got fortifications, fallback positions. And so hitting them on their way to a fallback position is completely legitimate in the war. It wasn't just killing them because they're running. They've got another place to hide and start shooting again, or wait till somebody, a lot of times you'll escape backwards.
Well,
look at
there's also another there's another issue to be considered, and that is that they will get shot. If they are retreating, the Russians will shoot their own soldiers. And that's not hyperbole.
They do that all the time. Yes. But in this particular case, these guys were...
It's almost like protocol.
Yes. We saw it. There's video of it. I've seen multiple videos of it online, posted by the Russians, I will add, as scare tactics and
to tell their own people.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's one of Stalin's great proclamations during the Second World War. And it's a motto that when I was living in Russia was like, it had ingrained itself in the language, and that is ni shagu nazad, not 1 foot backwards.
Right.
And there was a military organization called SMERSH during the Second World War that was their purpose. Their primary purpose
was to kill retreating soldiers,
people who were retreating. That's right.
Yeah.
So that they would either you get shot by us or you get shot by the enemy. And if
yes, Boston Brian, I'll send it to you.
God.
Yeah.
It's but anyhow, yes. So they were fleeing and they got smacked.
Yeah. Dem Boston Brian, I will send you that video. I have a folder I'll share with you of a video that I've gotten off of Telegram on a couple of the channels that I follow that are just gruesome.
I had a nice chat with Brian. I think he put it up on his channel as well. So
excellent.
That was a decent little chat.
We got some good people around here. We really do. But specifically in showing this footage, and I can't play it because I'll get dumped off of YouTube in a fucking heartbeat. But understand that it was like this. These guys started running across it, and then that's all the cluster munitions hitting over this wide area.
Yeah.
And the Russians in their trenches are dug so that they can avoid damage from cluster munitions. They reinforce the roofs of parts of them because cluster munitions have these effectively like big grenades. But if you throw the grenade at a ground on an underground tunnel, it's not going to do shit. And so as long as the trenches are deep enough and they reinforce the ceilings. And that's effectively what they've been doing for a long time. So they have a lot of defenses against these cluster munitions because they themselves have been using them this entire time. And one of their tactics is, if indeed the Ukrainians get too close to one of their entrenched areas, the Russians have been hitting them or firing cluster munitions at the area, even in an area where their own soldiers are, without warning, but that if anybody's back in the trenches, they will be protected, and any of the Ukrainians that are getting close to the trenches will be wiped out. That's what they use the cluster munitions for. It's sort of like a fail-safe last-ditch effort. They also do them in cities, but the important part of it.
I was just going to say, they also shoot them in the cities, which is a war crime by any standard. Even though we're not signatories to the anti-cluster bomb, neither are the Russians, neither the Ukrainians, but we are signatories to some sort of agreement that restricts using them in civilian areas. The Russians have. So, and we know the Russians have. And
right. They use white phosphorus. They do. I mean, they're fighting a Syria-like war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And
Go
part
check
of
out my buddy. Go check out John Sweeney's documentary. I think Under Troubled Skies. I think they've changed it now to a different name for the documentary. But Sweeney has evidence of phosphorus that's going to be used in The Hague.
Yeah.
You know, that he found when he was doing his documentary. Of course, they use cluster bombs, phosphorus. They don't care. They don't care.
And the interesting thing is, like, again, I mean, this is all well documented stuff by them. The interesting thing about the Russians, which is very different from what the Syrians do, or especially the Chinese do, for example, when the Chinese are engaged in fuckery in Africa and other places, and they do some awful shit, and on the border with India, for example, they do a lot of it under the radar and try to hide it and deny it as much as they can whenever it happens, or blame it on other shit. And you can argue we do the exact same thing. That if we're ever engaged in something and we get caught, the fallback, especially under the Bush administration, was to pretend it never happened, or we didn't. It was an accident, or it was an isolated incident, or whatever. But these
rogue elements.
Yeah, exactly. Strategically, that's how most countries handle it. The Russians don't. The Russians brag about this shit. They brag about raping Ukrainians. They brag about beheading people. They brag about this stuff like they're fucking ISIS. It's so odd. In 2023, it's almost like it would make sense in Afghanistan, you know, in their battle in Afghanistan, you know, in the 80s, right? But they do this now, presently, on their own Telegram channels, like chest beating to a level that
we're more brutal. We're more brutal than anybody.
Yeah, that's the point, right?
There's a lot of reasons why they do it. That's one of them. There's a lot of reasons they do that kind of stuff. They also do genuinely. They have a very different perspective on lots of different things, but would they? And we've talked about this, you and I, Hal.
Yeah.
They think that rules and regulations and that's naivete. That's hypocrisy. That at the end of the day, power is might makes right. Power is power, and anything other than that is posturing and you silly Westerners with your ideals and your rules and that doesn't make your laws. Forget about it. Power. That's all that matters. So if you come into, and especially when you go into a war, I mean, I remember Chechnya, I remember Grozny, my God, you know, the point was, and always has been, that they think you go to war and then you pretend to fight wars with some sort of like laws and rules. I mean, that's contrary to the entire idea of war. If you're going to go to war, you know, you're going to be killing people. And, you know,
and and their goal is kill everybody. And
everybody.
Raise the cities, destroy the people, take it over, and then wait till the grass starts growing again. That's been the Russian system for a long time, and it didn't change. Now, it was the system of time immemorial for kingdoms and countries that existed for a long time because there was no other option. You could not grow your country simply through international trade or opening a fucking app store. You know, there was no option. Every good was a physical one, and every physical good had to be made or extracted on a specific chunk of ground. We no longer live like that. And as a matter of fact, the economic world is singularly in between the ears of most of the people who make the money and live off of it. Is the goods and services that come from it are only germane to the locality. So you can have trade and this is what, like, if you listen to like the story of like Templar Knights and them doing this, like where you could trade and get money from one Catholic church to another, or those kind of, using that system, that was the birth of that idea, so that you don't have to, you can grow your country without having to be at the expense of another country. They've tried to find ways to do that for a long time. It seems like increasingly, and it might be just a macho thing, that the Russians just gave up on that idea entirely. Because again, what do you do if you have nothing to fucking contribute? You know, they're like, what are you gonna do? Sell ladas to, electric ladas? I mean, it's not gonna fucking happen. And what happens? the Saudis are already looking ahead. It's an interesting thing. If you look at the Saudis with that fucking Death Star trench city that they're building as a tourist trap, them trying to normalize relations with, like, Biden administration, Sullivan and Blinken have pulled off some pretty fucking amazing stuff in the Middle East lately, not the least of which is this normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel as a bulwark against Iran in particular, because Iran wants to destroy Israel and they also support the Houthis who want to destroy the Saudis. So there's it's a frenemies situation.
Crescent.
Yep. It's a frenemies issue. But then we just got back, like, I think, I'll have to check and see if they're out, but I don't know if even people know this. The Iranians, we negotiated the release of those prisoners in Iran. Let's see, U.S. prisoners, there you go. Yeah, there it is. And this is the timing on this? Yeah. United States and Iran have reached an agreement to win the freedom of 5 imprisoned Americans in exchange for several jailed Iranians and an eventual access to about $6 billion in Iranian oil revenue. Now, again, this is their money. I'll show you the article. Hold on. Let me fade this over here. But
that must have been done through, I saw the headline. That must have been done through an intermediary, right?
Well, interestingly enough, yeah.
The Canucks or the Swiss? Yeah,
there's a mix of people, but the important thing was that everybody knew who they were talking to. They were just talking to somebody through there. There were text exchanges where like Sullivan's team or Blinken's team is texting stuff to their go-between, and they're just forwarding it exactly as they did, so that the Iranians, and this was so that the Iranians, this is fascinating. The Iranians also had a sort of plausible deniability with their own people that they weren't talking to the Americans. They negotiated with another group of people, which is fucking.
And we won't be seen as normalizing relations with Tehran,
right?
Because if we had direct talks with them, it would legitimize them, and we don't want to do that.
Exactly.
This is international relations 101.
Right, and but we've been
silly. It's performative in many ways, but it matters.
But it's necessary, right? And
yeah,
it ended up, you can argue, costing us, it cost $6 billion and a couple of jailed Iranians. People who are, by the way, just going back to Iran. They're not going anywhere else after they leave there. And these are specifically jailed people. They're just getting transferred to another jail because even the Iranians don't want them out. But on top of that, this $6 billion in withheld stuff, we have to, because of the rules about sanctions and stuff, we have to pay interest. The United States, and in some cases the IMF, depending on it's not the IMF, World Bank, somebody has to pay interest on frozen assets. You have to accumulate the interest. And if at any time it's found to be, those sanctions are found to not be worthwhile, or they have any wiggle room at all, you're going to have to pay them that interest. And the accumulation on $6 billion or $180 billion, which was the Obama released that amount. That was all Iranian oil revenue that was just sitting in banks. We were paying them interest on that all during the time we were holding it. We were making payments to Iran. And then eventually, the idea is it was so bad that the longer we held it, we would get to the point in maybe a decade or so, if this just kept going on, where the interest payments would be equal to the amount of money that was being held. So it would have been like an investment scheme that other regimes could use. Yeah, sanction my shit.
401k for Iran.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was. It was a 401k for Iran. Exactly. And the same thing with this shit. We were paying them interest payments on this $6 billion. Not at the end, during. And so letting them have it back, they're going to spend it and it'll be gone. That's that. And you got to, we have international partners and all that stuff to make sure they don't spend it on terrorism and all that kind of, that's always a concern. Yes. But they need it so bad for food and medicine and other shit that more than likely that's exactly where it's going to go. We know exactly where that money is going to be spent. And we know because their needs in one area outweigh their needs for that kind of stuff, and terrorism they do on the cheap anyways. So, but we got these people back. We got these Americans back. They've released them to they sent them to house arrest out of the prison, and then they were moved out of the country. Let's see, the beginning of the process that I hope will expect to lead to their return to the United States is blanket. There's more work to be done to actually bring them home. My belief is that this is the beginning of the end of their nightmare. Saimak Namazi, Ahmad Shargi, Morad Tabaz, who had all been jailed on unsubstantiated charges of spying, as well as two others whose families withheld their names. One of them was an American scientist. Others a businessman. And by the way, some of these fuckers, two of them, very well might have been trying to help the Iranians at one point and were just, like idiotic do-gooders who thought, this poor regime and this awful America coming out, and then they found themselves on the receiving end and had a big wake-up call, and just became, an exchange rate. But anyways, they have been moved out of that prison. They were transferred to house arrest. This article's old. And then they have left the country insofar as I know. So they are moving them back there. And so
also as part of this negotiation, there's talk that it also might involve, changing Tehran's stance on sending drones to Russia.
Yes. Well, yes. And that became the secondary conversation.
It allows them to exert influence on Iran to stop sending Shahed drones over here. Although I think the Russians are almost actually up to speed at being independently capable of producing Shaheds themselves. I know there's a
but they don't have access. They don't have access to some of the materials.
That's right.
They still have to get the chips through Iran or through some other illegal intermediary or they got to use North Korea's, which suck. Yeah. So that said, there's this other. Let's talk about the ruble real quick. Because you and I, all last year we got to deal with the flood of the tankies and them going, the sanctions didn't even hurt the Russians.
The Russian economy is doing
even better than everyone else. And I would argue. Well, I'll show you what I'll put the article on the screen, but this is one of many. From ruble to rubble is the name of this article. Weaker ruble is now just a reflection of the underlying problem, which is that the oil price cap and sanctions are working. People, the tankies are so pissed. Following opinion piece was authored prior to Russia's central bank raising its key interest rate by 350 basis points to 12% on Tuesday. 12%. The key interest rate in Russia is 12%, and they still have inflation. What the shit? It's and they had an emergency meeting and they gathered around.
A ruble is worth a penny.
Yes, right. For the first time, the only time it's been like that was at the beginning of the war when it spiked. When it dropped in value almost entirely, and then it came back because they bought a bunch of gold and then they sold a bunch of. They made their trading partners trade only in rubles so that they could bring in their own and destroy it, so they could basically do a currency capture effectively and limit the amount of rubles in circulation to keep it artificially high. I would argue that and I hope let me see if I can find a chart. I would argue that we have a good case of club ugly, where it's not that the Russian economy was actually doing well last year. It's just that the club lights have come on, and we're seeing. You know what I'm talking about? That like people were convinced that it looked great in that lighting, and then once the sun comes up, or you roll over the next morning, or the lights in the club come on, you're like, God damn, what the hell?
Oh my God!
Yeah, right. That's what I think is happening. I mean, it's arguably on a much bigger scale happening with the Chinese economy as well. But
there's a terrible story I could tell you. I'm debating whether. Yeah, I'll tell you. So there's this apocryphal story during the Iraq War, where U.S. soldiers flying out of Iraq and leaving the war zone.
Yeah.
That the captain would come on and say, we've just now left Iraqi airspace, and all the soldiers go, yeah, we're free, yeah, we're out of the war. And then the pilot goes on and says, all you female soldiers back there, you are no longer 10s, you are now back down to being 4s.
No, right.
Of course, they were in there. It was a prick awful story.
Right.
And I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but that's that kind of thing.
Right.
But look, here's the other thing. In all seriousness, that's a silly little story.
It's a very
No
Trump joke.
seriousness.
That's
Oh,
where he
it's a
got it
very
from. It's where it's a
misogynistic.
Don Jr.
It's
It's a
a very
Don Jr.
disgusting.
joke, right?
But
But yes,
it's also it's the military. It's not exactly
yes, right,
reconstructed. Anyhow, regardless,
yeah,
the one serious story about all of this that's worth relaying is I was in Moscow in '98 when the last time that the Russian ruble
hmm
basically collapsed. It was completely devalued, and I remember the run on the banks, and I remember the panic in the streets of Moscow, and
hmm
I remember how it was one of the last nails in Yeltsin's coffin,
hmm
because up until that point there was this kind of like, we're fine, everything's fine, we'll work it out, we'll figure it out, and then the ruble devalued, everybody panicked, and though they were able to restabilize it to a certain degree, there was this general sense of like, we have got to do something about the leadership in the Kremlin.
right.
And it was one of the last things that made the Russian people turn on Yeltsin and ultimately lead to Putin. So
The
don't
irony.
this is not a small thing.
Uh-uh.
The fact that the ruble has absolutely, you know, taken
The
a
idea that they went up
nosedive.
350 basis points. You know how much everybody was like, oh, shitting about the U.S. economy when you're talking about 25 basis points? 25 fucking basis points. A quarter of a point is effectively what they're talking
Overnight.
about. Yeah. And they went up 350 basis points, which basically they did they pulled a Joker. They walked into a room with a pile of fucking rubles and set it on fire and said this money's just no longer in circulation. We're just taking it out, and I don't care who the fuck owns it. And that's effectively their monetary policy right now. And there's this article in the the Telegraph. Yeah, this is recent. This is points to what you're talking about how big this is for them. The ruble's crash is Putin's moment of truth. From the Telegraph. The curse of August has struck again in Russia. The long-awaited currency crisis has finally hit as a collapse in the usable energy revenues bleeds the Kremlin dry, and the slow damage of G7 sanctions eats away at the country's economic foundations. There's no arguing it. There's no. I don't give a shit. We have some fake tanky trolls that show up in the chat room occasionally when you and I are talking. We've got the occasional maggot that feels like they had this weird, desperate need to come to the rescue of Vladimir Putin of all fucking people. Like, I get them thinking the sun shines out of Trump's ass, but you don't. It can stop there. You don't have to like everybody, every dictator that shares his same fucking fashion sense. And that seems to be what this is based on. But this is bad. The ruble has fallen by 40
He's in trouble.
since since
He's in real trouble.
November.
And it's not good. And I hear I've seen since the ruble fell apart. I've seen all this like pushback, as you say, these guys like desperately trying to make sure, send out the messages that, oh no, everything's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've seen all these guys like, oh, I've spoken to people inside of Russia, my friends inside of Russia, or family members, or just people I know, whatever. And they're saying, oh, they don't see any problem in the store shelves. Well, they may not be seeing problems in the store shelves right now.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that might still be coming. But look, they can feed their population. That kind of stuff. It's not whatever middle class in Russia there was, or the vast majority, which is the lower classes, because it's based poverty is just everywhere in Russia. It's not those guys that are really going to get it in the neck, at least not immediately. But if you had money and you're an oligarch and you had, that's why they move their money out of Russia, is for this very reason.
Yeah.
But if you had money and you're an oligarch and you had accounts that were, tied to your ruble holdings, overnight you've just been decimated.
Right.
Those are the guys. Those are the guys that are going to turn around and be like, why am I supporting this asshole who just decided to do this disastrous war? And then they're going to start looking at other alternatives. They're going to it's the same damn thing that I've been saying for so long. and
Yeah.
I stand by it. It's the ruling classes beneath the czar that are going they're the ones that are going to be angry and
Yeah.
disaffected and start to look for alternatives to Putin. They will fight amongst themselves until a dominant person or group of people takes prominence, wins whatever that, that fighting on that
Right.
level, and then we will see Putin in real serious trouble one way or another.
Well,
But
in this
it's
article,
clear that
yeah.
the power brokers in Russia are already starting to think about
Yeah,
a post.
it's a brown trouser day there. Clearly,
Yeah,
Vladimir. This is the Telegraph again. Vladimir Putin can no longer maintain his line that the exchange rate slide is a calibrated and deliberate move in budget management. He touted ruble strength all last year as proof of Russia's economic invulnerability. So once it goes down, then you got to live with that. It's like basing your economic argument on the stock market. If the stock market takes a shit, then you can't argue that your system, is working. Or in Trump's case, for example, if it continues to go up, you can't say that the other guy is antithetical to what you're doing. Because how is the opposite of what you were doing making the fucking stock market
can't
continue
have
to
it both
rise?
ways.
But
Can't
this
have
is
it both ways.
they'll try because they're talking about
Oh
it
yeah.
in every kitchen in Russia, said financial journalist Orlin Skim. Tim Ash from Chatham House said the devaluation is an internal propaganda disaster and, quote, the clearest signal yet that the oil price cap and sanctions are working. Russia is running out of usable hard currency to the point where Aeroflot has been landing at least 9 of its Boeing Airbus passenger jets with their brakes switched off because the airline is struggling to obtain parts at viable costs and can no longer serve its fleet. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
landing. That's how you save money. You are landing planes with the brakes switched off, using reverse thrust effectively. Yeah, this is what it says here. Pilots have to rely on reverse thrust alone. A leaked memo obtained by aviators China warned them of the risk of overrunning the runway in wet weather. This is a country in dire straits. Only in the magic world of Russian statistics did the economy grow 4.9% in the second quarter year on year, and they're having to fucking use engines to brake because they shut their fucking brakes off.
Have you seen the story about I think it's, last I heard it was 4 planes that had been canceled flights leaving from Ataturk Airport in Istanbul going back to either Petersburg or Moscow, and they've at the time of writing of the article that I saw this morning, so a good 8 hours ago, not 10 hours ago, there were all these Russians sitting around in the various lounges in the airport because they'd already gotten through, and the flights were delayed, and then they were canceled and all the rest of it. So now they're just they're in essence stranded in Istanbul because they can't even leave the airport. And this is like dozens if not hundreds of Russians milling around Ataturk Airport. So no, it's at some point you have to just look at this thing and go, despite your protestations, you're screwed. Your economy is clearly screwed.
And this is the other thing. Rats leaving the sinking ship is not surprising, but the smart rat leaves early. And in this particular case, one of the other things they bring up in this Telegraph article is capital flight. The line says capital flight is bleeding Russia dry. Not only are the smart people leaving, but who the fuck is going to invest in that country? And if you're there, why would you invest your country in your own country at that point, just so that Putin can use it to fund this war, or just burn through it, or build himself another fucking house while he's burning through it in this stupid fucking war? It's insanity. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I have to say, there's I love how the article, Russia is now caught in a classic emerging market crisis. So that's a country that's been around this fucking long is having an emerging market crisis, and China's in the same spot. China's literally the arguments I've heard for China's economic situation is that they're a developing country. okay, first of all, no developing country has a space program. Once you have a space program, you're not developing anymore. You don't have an excuse for your like we have hunger issues, but we have like food insecurity in the United States that we try to work on. And we work on a federal and state level, and we allocate money for it, and it shifts, and it's part of the budget all the time. And so it makes sense that we have NASA. China, on the other hand, just goes, I don't know, whether are those people hungry? I'm over here. And they just leave them to die effectively right now. That's the plan. Fuck those people out in that area. That's it. And the same thing with Russia to some degree. They're like, they're tourniqueting parts of their economy and parts of their country. Like, we don't care about that area anymore. We can't afford to. And if you want us to care about you, move here or go to war. Join the war. If you want us to give a shit about you, you got to go fight. That's effectively it. But the fact that they're calling this like Russia is now caught in a specter of hyperinflation hangs over Putin as Russia's economy crumbles. Pressures build on multiple fronts as ruble plunges, wages surge, and borrowing peaks. This is a fucking perfect storm. It's fucked.
Yeah.
And I like the nerve of some of these assholes to go, it's fine. It's fine. Now, granted, I have not heard Scott Ritter say anything positive about any of this stuff, but it might be because he was kicked off of YouTube for hate speech. So so that's positive. And interestingly enough, I suppose
I'm all broken up about it. Oh,
yeah, right. Oops, YouTube lost another pedophile influencer, I guess.
Meanwhile, Alexander Dugin is supporting Hinkle's Twitter. I mean,
yes, I know. And that's the thing is that one of the things that I was looking at, like if you look at the panic around Marjorie Taylor Greene and some others, and obviously the NRA, the Russian money through the NRA that was flowing for a good long while, and really was the if it wasn't the massive money that was involved in Republican campaigns, it was the foundational undergirding. Like, you could always count on that money's always there. That money oddly coming in through the NRA, and the NRA, because it's an NGO and it's because it's fighting for the rights of guns everywhere, even it's the National Rifle Association, but it's also it's not the American Rifle Association. It's for nations to have the right so they could argue we have the right to go to Russia and advocate for gun rights, and we can go to fucking Saudi Arabia and do the same fucking thing. It's never going to happen, but they can give us a bunch of money.
That's me.
Yeah, I thought so. Well, it's certainly not ambulance here. Yeah, that's a European ambulance.
Well, it could be a cop. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I'm going with
live on Kershachik,
Yeah, right.
It's the main dragon. So.
And then of course a UFO is landing outside. Where was I? Oh, so this idea that we'll get this stuff later because we're out of time anyways, but
we're out of time. But look, we were talking a little bit about the tankies and then kind of like trying to put a spin on this. And there's just at some point there's no denying that they're not doing well. Financially.
Sorry, I remember what I was saying. Yes, I was remembering what I was saying about the NRA. So the NRA money that was coming in was hinky and a violation of FARA. Although the NRA, interestingly enough, has people within them that are registered as foreign agents because they advocate on behalf of other countries and to them back and forth from the United States point of view to that country and then back. So they're allowed to do this. This is how they got that money in and out. But if they have to register under FARA to do that, the members of the NRA and the people on their, in their group that does that. And that's one of the ways they got around it. Jackson Hinkle is not registered as a foreign agent. And if he's being paid and given a memo, he's violating FARA. He is advocating, and again, you can be a paid mouthpiece. You can work for RT like Lee Camp and others did. And technically you're not violating FARA. But the minute you throw a political rally and you have politicians there and you're hanging out backstage with them specifically, which is what Hinkle did when he had when he showed up at Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff and, whatever, that crowd, they overlap a bunch. Once that happens, you're getting perilously close to conveying messages to those people from those people. And if they find your communications or, the checks going through, you're in deep shit, dude.
Yep.
That's a huge thing. And this is the other article top that I wanted to point out before we go. Russia's central bank is preparing for long-term inflation. That, it's a little, look at CPI inflation year over year. Look at this blue line, which is theirs and the rest of the world. The CPI and the bank rate. Here's the bank rate. Here's the CPI. Or no, other way around. Here's the CPI is the bank rate. That's fucked up. And you can see it stepping with each other because it can't get any closer. It's literally separating to the point where there's nothing you can do to bring those numbers closer. That's terrible, economically speaking. It's just like these idiots. But you know what? Who am I to say? He's at the top of his game. Nobody in Hollywood could play him. He's a genius. And apparently we have an idiot running our country who apparently is outsmarting these smart people who are at the top of their game, smart guys. It's amazing. It's just fucking amazing.
It's not going well for them. I mean, and then before we go, to take it back to what we discussed at the very beginning of this thing, if the Ukrainians make it to the sea, which I am cautiously optimistic they will be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be devastating. It's going to be this, it's going to be a moment for the Russians where, the veil will be lifted. I believe that it will be so disturbing to them, and because they're being told, obviously, that everything's going fine, sort of thing.
Right.
But at some point, they're not going to be able to deny it. And if they can cut off the land bridge and really honestly threaten Crimea from being part of Russia, which it isn't, but it was illegally seized. But if every single home in Russia is going, well, our ruble isn't worth anything anymore. All of our life savings are worthless. And by the way, our sense of self and who we are as an empire, which is built on the cornerstone of Crimea, that's gone too. What are we? Who are we? Where's our future? If I'm in my 50s or in my 60s or even in my 40s to a certain degree, I've seen this now twice in my lifetime, that like everything that I built my life on was just ripped out from beneath my feet.
Right.
It's not going to go well for the Russians. It just isn't. If the West can stay the course and support the Ukrainians will do the fighting and the dying, sadly, and it's tragic. And we should not be pushing them to sue for a peace that they don't agree upon. But that's for another time.
We agree.
But at the end, we agree on that. But at the end of the day, if we can stay the course, the Ukrainians will do the fighting and the dying to gain their sovereignty, which they so desperately want and deserve.
Right.
And Russia is going to be, Russia will lose this war. And ultimately, and I've said this before, and the last thing I'll say before we go is that, hopefully by losing this war, it'll ultimately be a good thing for Russia. Because they'll look in the mirror and maybe for once they'll, instead of having a revolution every 75 years to, this is the Decembrists back in like 1840 or something like that. There was the Decembrist revolution. Then there was the anarchists at the end of the 19th century. Then there was the Soviet revolution in 1917. And then the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of Putin's empire. It's always been kicking down the road the things that most Russians actually know that they need to do. And that is to build a proper civil society with a middle class and the rule of law and all sorts of things that other liberal democracies have already figured out is beneficial, not just in altruism, but just a system that works better. and do the hard work that they've been needing to do. If that's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
losing means for the Russians, then
Yeah,
maybe
it seems
there's
to
a
be the
silver
only way
lining.
they could learn that lesson. Whether they will or not
Yeah,
is the big question.
big question.
Yes,
Big question.
and on on the other end of that, I would argue that the ruble collapsing and the failure of the Russian government to be able to project soft kind of influence power throughout the world, as because they're dealing with actual blood and guts warmongering, which seems to be their current mission. And same thing with China, and their influence campaigns. As their economies crash or have difficulties, they don't have as much money to spread around, to these groups. And if you're ever wondering why MTG and all that crowds are all screaming like someone is standing on their air hose in a very odd way, that's why.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you see
Yeah.
anybody, and this isn't just elected officials, if you see anybody who's oddly just defending China, defending Russia, saying we need to leave them alone, or being super oddly anti-America in the outcome of these kind of things, understand that's why they're acting this way. Someone is standing on their air hose. That's where they're getting their support from, and they have been for a very long time. And the more it looks like these guys are going to fall, by the way, on their own sword of their own,
Oh
by
yeah, nobody to blame but themselves.
exactly. The more it gets close to that, the more you're going to see these folks freak out and blame us or blame Europe or NATO or whoever, or Victoria Nuland or whoever the fuck, because they can't afford to admit why they're defending these, because it's a selfish reason. And that, once that comes to a head where people start recognizing more and more who that is, the Paul Manaforts of the world are more frequent in a bunch of these circles than we're aware of, because they've been put there years ago to do this very thing. And, without getting paranoid about it, it's just a reality. It's just how they operate. Once that funding dries up, what do those fuckers do? I mean, look at, what about Gal Luft? Remember Gal Luft? Remember the whole story about Gal Luft and Hunter Biden, and he was an Israeli arms deal. He's on the run now,
Mm-hmm.
or all that stuff. That was going to be the turning point. Where the fuck is he? Why was he screaming? Well, he's screaming because he's paid by the Chinese government. The Chinese government said, we're not getting a return on our investment, so they cut him loose.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. And so he was trying to get the Republicans to pay his bills while he's on the run. That was it. That's all it is. It's no bigger than that. It's no more complicated than that. And that's why it lasted about 8 days. Somebody's like, Gal Luft who? Exactly. For those of you that don't know, that was the guy who did the video for the Post that said he had information on Hunter Biden's transactions. Never provided any of it, of course. But, and then because he was charged with trading Chinese arms in Africa, among other things, and he just beat feet because while he was out on bail. So anyways, I appreciate you being on, brother. We'll talk again Saturday. Be safe. And and we'll keep up with this. I'm curious to see. I mean, I think over the next 3 weeks, that's what we're going to be watching, is this breakthrough. And I wonder if the stuff going on with Trump will distract away from what's happening there, or give it the kind of under the radar push, so that the people who are against it, the people who are most vociferously against supporting Ukraine, have other fish to fry. And people are asking about Putin's health. I don't know, because it's hard to tell if that's his double, and nobody knows. And he's, again, I would just say Pervitin. He's got a shaky hand, and the shaky hand often comes from when they're giving you hot shots to keep you running like Elvis. And Elvis managed to run for another 2 years once they started that shit, and he was on a collapse before it all came crashing down. They did lose another general, though. The guy he fired, Army Commander Zidko or whatever, Jidko, whatever. He died. He had a prolonged illness. He had malignant Russianism, and anyways, he was allergic to gravity, so he died. He's 57, and just got too close to a window. I guess
for a Russian, that's pretty old. Actually,
it is pretty old. It's actually pretty, and alcoholism being what is cirrhosis of the liver. It makes total sense. It really does. So, anyways, you're awesome. Take care of yourself. Be safe.
All right, man.
And I'll see you on Saturday. Okay.
All right.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And you guys, thank you for being here with me. It's wonderful. I went a little bit over, which normally on a after the jam night I don't tend to do because I'm fucking tired. Because we finished about 1 a.m. It was 1:07, I think, when I rolled out the door. You know how you look at the clock and when you got a long drive ahead of you and you're like, okay, here we go. But I managed to go straight through. Got in almost exactly 5. It was almost 4 hours on the nose, which is straight through. That's a couple of gas stops. That's 2 gas stops and 1 relief. And if you do it right, you double up. Where are the talkies here? No. I'm going. Yes, I'll go rest a little bit. And I will see you guys this afternoon. We have a lot of stuff to cover, and I have to say, the reactions from the Glenn Becks of the world and stuff about this indictment. My curious thing, and then again, I'm not pre-watching this shit because I want to watch it with you guys. I want us to experience this together. I'm not here to dunk on people. It's a battle of wits. And so I looking at these things, I'm going to be very curious how many of them will criticize this indictment and scream about how unconstitutional it is and how it's based on nothing and that it's a travesty and that it's just election interference without ever having read it. Curious. I have my thoughts on that. I definitely have an idea or two, as you might imagine. But I suppose we'll have to wait and find out if it has anything to do with the kidney. I mean, who can say, really? We don't know. We won't know.
We're going to be a country no more. I actually think it will not. It will be a country no more. We have to slam it. Who wants people coming in from foreign countries? Wasn't that long ago. I broke their ass. I had a beat off. In his sock drawer. Christopher Columbus. Huh? We're going to be appointing very pro-crime judges. I've been involved in the 2 greatest scams in American history. Legal, look. They don't like the gas. The numbers should skyrocket downward. Where's Dick? Hi, Dick. Do we like Dick? Yeah. What?
Dumps. They call them dumps. Big, massive dumps.
Michigan gave us Motown. Gave us the Mustang.
Dude, oh yeah, that's normal.
I agree. I'm a dope.
When they gaze upon Yosemites, I know words, I have the best words. The Mueller report, I wish, covered the oranges. You know, we just set another stock rocket. You saw that, right? To be a sanctuary. Combat infantrymen. Yesterday's a hard word for me. You know, I told the U.S. Marshals to go get the man who killed another man.
We appreciate it very much, Tim Apple.
They sacrifice every day for the furniture, the future. I approved waterboarding. Made a pivotal, really.
Despite these obsolete rules, Karen, an anomalous, really an anomalous